Okay, there it is. So let's get started. Free will or determinism? We need necessarily two groups. By devil's advocate, we can't have everybody picking and choosing. I'm going to create some stipulations, and then from there, you guys can organically start from wherever you would like. I'm going to prohibit anybody from taking a compatibilist stance. So anybody from taking a stance that there is a compatibilism or could be a compatibilism between free will and determinism, however you may define it so narrowly, just because we want a debate between free will and determinism. It may be a general conclusion, compatibilism we come to in the end, but so just as a stipulation for the sake of argument, I'm going to prohibit anybody from taking the perspective of a compatibilist. We need a couple of people taking the side of free will, that is, humans have free will and free agency to act without any inhibitions or determinism from either the external or internal world, or however so you restrict it. But we have complete free agency over our actions, and versus two members who completely disagree, that they think we are completely determined. No matter how narrowly you define free will, there's always a backdoor, a rule or a physical law or whatever you think is prohibiting us from acting freely. We're being determined somehow. Any volunteers to take whichever side? I could, for example, take. So I'll be one of the deterministic advocates. Gonzalo, you want to take a side?
I think that I've been always an advocate for determinism, so I want to switch sides now because I want to be evil.
Sounds good. I like that. Johan, sorry.
This is a problem for me, but I'm very sorry. I didn't prepare for this meeting. But
you don't have
my personal opinion is somewhere in between. But just for the discussion, I have to choose. I choose free will.
Okay, so Alvaro, you and I will be proponents of a deterministic perspective. Just for the sake of argument, Alvaro, I know and that's true, Johan, actually, you make a good point that most of us probably fit somewhere in the middle, somewhere between, but for the sake of argument, it's to enlighten us, is to show us what the other side is really thinking. Why are they saying that there's free will, we have free will? Or why is it that they're so adamantly claiming that there's determinism? Or what are some of the holes in their argument or theory about free will and determinism you've ever thought of before? So this is the whole point of arguing by devil's advocate. We want to basically see what the other side is thinking and seeing if we're making any mistakes in our reasoning as well. Again, I think Johan, your mic, and Alvaro, your mic are both. Oh no, just Johan's mic is on. And I'm getting some feedback. So unless I call on you, let's just turn our mics off.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay. So we don't have to necessarily make any opening arguments in terms of like a whole speech. But if somebody wants to start, and I'll kind of let that be me. Who would like to begin? Who would like to make maybe an opening statement about their perspective, either on the case of free will or on the case of determinism?
I could say this is very simplistic. I have this cup of coffee. I can leave it, empty it, or drink it up.
Okay. That's good to hear, though. That's okay. Your argument being that it is a demonstration. Look, I can do this, and I'm telling you that I can just take it away.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Gonzalo, you raise your hand too.
Yes, from my perspective, I think that if we are giving the opportunity to, let's say, engage with our reasoning, I think that we should be able, through reasoning, to resolve most of the possible situation in which we may feel influenced by someone else, which allow us to have some sort of complete, I don't want to use the word liberty, but okay, agency in order to choose our own path about how do we want to interact with the world. Does it make sense, or it's complicated?
Are you asking something or saying something? I didn't quite.
I'm saying something. Can you guys hear me fine?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, because we have our huge minds and our rationality, that means that we have the capacity in order to analyze what our, let's say, our influences somehow from the external world and get rid of them. So that means that we are the ultimate responsibles for the choices that we made, because we have our own rationality in order to think about it.
Okay. First two good points. Yeah. First two good points by you two, though. So just to summarize, and I'll do this periodically. So I'll speak about determinism after I summarize what you two said. So Johan's perspective of free will, argument of more actionable. This is you have free will based upon your observation that one can consciously plan and do something, right? You are planning on taking up the cup and you're planning on taking down the cup. Gonzalo is making a different kind of argument, that your argument for free will is not based on observation, it's based on one's or an individual's capacity to reason internally, that they're able to correct previous judgment or previous knowledge if they want to amend their thoughts, beliefs, or knowledge. And that is evidence of a conscious or rational decision. Rational decision being, it's maybe we can, in your case, it sounds like you're defining that from irrationality, that rational decision making is planned and the source is you like that's coming from you and nowhere else. Which maybe I can begin with. So I'll maybe make an opening statement, and then I'll maybe rebut some of your arguments. So I don't think that you can ultimately reduce your actions or your thoughts to yourself. That there's that if you assume that reality is basically physical, and I say basically meaning fundamentally, so not basically like generally, but basically fundamentally physical, that there is always a law of nature, whether in your mind, so neurochemical, or in your body, so physiological. There's always or coming or maybe based in some way quantum mechanics. There is in some sense a physical law that is manipulating you. Whether that means that physical law, like classical mechanics, is based on predictable theory, or quantum mechanics based upon statistical theory. That there's a likelihood you're going to do this versus that. Regardless, you conform to those rules, and your freedom is always limited by those rules. So you really don't have any freedom. You're ultimately reduced to the rules and laws that those rules and laws dictate from the beginning. It sounds like maybe just to, because I don't want to say everything here, but maybe just to talk on Gonzalo's point. So Gonzalo's point, I would contradict by claiming that why does rationality have to mean free will? So why does rational thought necessarily have to be free? Of course, rationality may be defined as conscious, deliberate, and planned thought, but planned doesn't necessarily mean free. It simply has to mean, it simply has to describe a thoughtful or methodological preparation for something that comes afterwards. Like, I'm taking this action, therefore I'm going to plan how to take that action. That doesn't necessarily require free will. I can find computers that do the same thing, or other animals that may huddle together and plan maybe a hunt of wolves, for example. And I bet most of us would argue that free wolves definitely don't have the capacity or the extent of free will that humans do. That's my gist. Yeah, Gonzalo.
No, but I think that I think that somehow you're missing a small part of my point. Kind of like the point that I wanted to make is that as humans, that we can observe how the world works and can interact with these physicals and biological things that we may have, we can always choose to take another path. Does it make sense?
Okay, so what you're saying is that
and rationality based on from that perspective, you can observe the world and say like, this works like this, and then take the other way around and choose to do something else. And in that interaction, we are free. Free in quotes. I mean, there's an extent that we can go in order to do whatever we want. Whether we succeed or not in our results or in our search is completely besides the point, but we can do it. And I think that that's the key thing.
Okay, thanks. Okay, no, that's good clarity, though. I don't want to rebut just yet, because I think Alvaro hasn't spoken yet, so we can let Alvaro speak. Your mic is off.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yes, sorry, I'm having technical issues today. So, well, I wanted to pick up from Johan's example and maybe pick up from what Gonzalo said recently. And I wanna start with not anything in the mystic world. I want to start with us humans. I think many times we have the illusion that we're making choices. And as a matter of fact, we have the illusion that we're making rational choices. Yet the choices we're making are being framed or manipulated by other humans. So just to give you an example, if a country is going to vote for a presidential candidate, the people from the government and who are part of the political system may present two choices to the people from the nation. Let's say one is from the left, one is from the right. So the people in that country have the illusion that they are choosing rationally among two choices. Yet the political system is not presenting them with a third choice or a fourth choice or a fifth choice. It's not presenting them with the middle of the road choice or with the top or bottom or however you want to label it. So the people are going to vote or are going to choose among the options that they are being given. And in that sense, they are quote unquote choosing, but they are only choosing among the options that somebody's already given them. So if we extrapolate this to the idea of that there is a spiritual realm or supernatural or that there is a God or gods. Maybe picking up from the example of Johan, he has a cup of tea at his table, and he's decided whether to drink it or leave it. But there is a higher power which is allowing him to have a cup of tea at his table. And as a matter of fact, he's only choosing, or he mentioned that he's only choosing to drink it or leave it, but he could actually throw it away. He could do so many other things with the cup of tea. So I am using the example of politics, in which there is also, it is known for manipulation and framing, to claim that there exists, or there is a space for the supernatural to do the same with us.
I see. So just to summarize, and then I saw Gonzalo's hand and then Johan's hand. Just to summarize Alvaro's point. So because I want to connect the political perspective to the generally behavioral or neural perspective, and actually there's a good connection there. So what you're saying is that you're using the example of in political spaces or in citizenship spaces, people only act according to the several options they're given in political in polities in a society by that polity, and so their freedom is. Their free will is kind of an illusion. They're only acting on the options that they're given, just like they're only acting on the options like Johan's teacup. They're only acting on the options that they have in their heads right then and there. They don't have the free will to really choose whatever they want to do, because they're just restricted by what their minds are already giving them in terms of options. So there's that connection. Okay. I just wanted to summarize, because I think that connects nicely with Gonzalo's. Gonzalo, what you were talking before about, you were clarifying how you're actually talking about when you're rationally making choices, out of the multiple paths of life you could take, or plans of action you can take. And I'll leave it from there. I think, Gonzalo, you raised your hand next.
Yeah, and I actually think that precisely that's my point. Johan has all the options available for him. He can destroy the cup if he wants to. He's just choosing not to do it. Maybe because he really likes the content. We don't really know. And also from the political perspective, yes, that's right. There are two options available, let's say, but that doesn't mean that you can build your own. Nothing forbids you from building your own. If you analyze from that perspective, it's like, yeah, I'm not convinced by these two political options. What happens if I create my own? Can I do it? Is there any external influence on me? No, there's not. There's nothing that prevents me from actually not doing it. Because again, the willingness to do it, it's there. You can do it. You have the option available for you always of doing whatever you want. Make sense?
Yeah. So, and then just to clarify, so what you're saying, and then move on to Johan, what you're saying is that it's not, the idea of free will doesn't come from you creating those choices. What matters in free will is that because regardless, I think we can at least all agree, if I know we're still taking sides, but we can at least start from a general assumption that there's somehow physical limitations, in the sense that so the perspective you're coming from is that there's always going to be physical limitations, or like you can't jump 1,000 meters, for example. And so you don't have that option because you physically can't, right? So that we, like, for example, I wouldn't call that determinism. I would restrict our definition more so than that. What you're saying is that regardless of the number of choices you have, you are making a choice, a free choice, out of those options that you have. Okay. Johan?
Yeah, I'm hoping not saying already what you or one of you have said. I think free will is never absolute. Our brain is limited, like you discussed before. So our choice is limited in our by our limitations. So free will, yes, but it has boundaries. I don't think it's a discussion that you can only have free will if you're like godlike.
That's a good point. I think we can, from Alvaro's and my side, we can definitely accept, like, I think it would be too ridiculous to expect that the proponents of free will, and I don't think any proponents of free will really believe this, that you can act like God, right? You can act like you can do whatever you want. So there's physical limitations. So we have to be reasonable in the perspectives we're taking. But I would still claim that Johan is really not making a free decision when he is making a free choice. It specifically comes from something specific, Gonzalo, you said, when you said you can think of all the choices, right? There may be limited choices. You can't turn the cup into you can't snap your fingers and turn the cup into a vase, for example, right? You can't do that. You can't use your hands to morph it into a vase. You can't do that. So there's physical limitations, but you can do things with the cup out of a range of possibilities, like throw the cup down and break it or spill the water or things like that. But I would still claim that Johan is still determined to only restrict himself to those choices, because he didn't think about, at least from what he showed us, but the example he gave in the very beginning. And I know, Johan, you might have been thinking about, hey, maybe I can throw the cup down or whatnot. But let's assume that you only thought at that moment, oh, my two choices are bring the cup up and put the cup down. That's what I want to give as an example. The fact that in this example, he only thought of those choices indicates that his mind was determined to only think of those choices in that time. I mean, you pick a different point in time, maybe Johan, because in a different setting, in a different context, in a different environment, his mind might naturally think of throwing a cup down. Like, for example, if I'm teaching a physics class and the whole point of me is to provide a lesson on elasticity. So I'm using a rubber band, and I have a few rubber bands, and I know I intend to break the rubber band because that's the whole point of the demonstration. So that idea of breaking the rubber band is in my head. But if I'm not in a demonstration, I'm just tying things together with rubber bands because I need to package something away. The whole idea of breaking the rubber band might never pop into my mind because that I'm not in that context. I'm not in that environment. Not because I rationally choose not to do it, but because my mind is not in that environment. And that environment is determining me confining me to only think of the choices that I would naturally think of in that specific context. Does that make sense? I don't know if my argument was too convoluted or not. Okay, Gonzalo?
No, I think it's no. I think that I understood your argument. It's related to let's say how context determine the options available for us at first hand, correct? But at the same time, kind of like my brain goes to, yeah, you cannot morph a cup into a vase without the proper utensils or tools. If you want to do that, you will definitely need an oven and maybe some other sort of tools to switch this cup into a vase. Maybe the cup is no longer there and you have destroyed the cup and now the cup is a vase, but you did it. So, and you had that option available for you. regardless of anything. I mean, you can pursue and get let's say any one of us can turn the place where they are sitting at on fire if they wanted. Nothing is preventing that. You could actually do it. And it's like, okay, why I don't do it? See my point? It's like your own rationality is telling you like, no, I need to have a place to work or to live, so that means that I cannot. But if you really wanted to, you could really do it.
Okay, so I'd like to say something, but I'll say something later. But I think you're also, you make a, it's not the, I think it's not the point you're necessarily making. It's you're changing the perspective around. So what it sounds like what you're doing is that instead of arguing for free will, not in the sense of what you could do, what you're arguing is that you are free to choose the options you have because of what you can't do. So because you were not prohibited, because nobody is here stopping me from creating a fire, right? It's a bad thing. I'll be fired from my job if I do, but because nobody's here preventing me from creating the fire, then that means that I am free to create that fire if I so wished or thought of. Okay.
Yeah. Side note, I feel really weird doing this sort of mental ideas, but I think that, yeah, I'm sorry.
You mean the whole part about the fire or the changing perspectives? Yeah, it's a little bit weird sitting in a classroom and thinking I could build a fire right now. So let's hope. I don't know. I've never read YouTube's terms of service, so let's just cross our fingers and hope that there's no keywords that, like fire and starting a fire, that YouTube is going to flag and be like, no, sorry, take that video down. Alvaro.
Yeah, I was actually going to propose if you guys would like to actually flip sides now, because since we did mention that, I think maybe all of us are actually middle of the road in this issue. I think it would also be a nice opportunity to hear the counter argument that we ourselves have. So maybe flip sides and now argue for the opposite side. I don't know if you like to do that, but I think it's getting to a point in which maybe we have spoken out our ideas on one side and we're like flirting with going middle of the road or going on the other side. So that's why I'm proposing that.
I guess we can do a vote on that. But for me, so if you vote to switch sides, I would vote against it. For me personally, my headspace right now is in the headspace of arguing for determinism, and I need a little bit of more time to kind of stay in that headspace, and then maybe we can summarize more freely and discuss more freely the topic kind of in the last 30 minutes. So for now, at least for me, Gonzalo, do you agree? Johan, okay, yeah. So let's stay in the same headspace on the same sides. Alvaro.
Okay. Then I want to propose something different, which is maybe we discuss something very detailed and specific, which is when I think this subject becomes the most interesting. Because we know, for example, that because of the law of physics, we cannot do certain things unless we really either are God or believe in the supernatural, or we know that that's basically out of the question. But then we can look at examples. I brought up in a different meeting the example from Greek mythology of Oedipus, in which he kills his father and marries his mother based on a prophecy. The Bible is also filled with examples like that. And I'm sure we can come up with different examples, but I think the subject becomes interesting when something very detailed and specific happens, right? It's not the idea of whether it's not whether we can fly or not fly. It's more like, okay, was, for example, 9/11, the terrorist attack, was that something that was planned? Was that something that was based out of free will, or that was bound to happen in humanity's history? And that is just to mention a recent example, but I'm sure there are many examples in history that we can discuss whether it was bound to happen or not. Is something that are as transcendental as that, or something as, Greek mythology and a character from Greek mythology killing his father and marrying his mother?
Okay, so I think what you're proposing is that we change our domain of inquiry from thinking about free will and determinism in terms of physical constraints and physical capacities of the brain to societal constraints, whether it's political or behavioral, but societal constraints. I wouldn't mind that. I mean, it might help us narrow down our level of discussion and also take specific examples from real life that we want to use. Like, we could have chosen the other way around. We could have chosen to ignore the political and societal domain and chose to focus on the natural and physical one. But yeah, if you want to focus on the societal and political one and then ask us to draw specific examples from real life, I wouldn't mind that. Let's see how it goes, though. I don't want to force anybody to make that to use specific examples from that domain. But if you would like to and you want to continue going in that direction, then I'll go with you on that, Alvaro, because we're a team, right? So okay. Gonzalo, and was it you? Yeah, you're here. You have your hand raised. Yeah, sure. Shoot.
I think throughout history, it's actually a point for free will, because most of the time, really small decisions made by simple persons were the ones that created this sort of result. Let's say, for example, how I don't remember. I think it was World War II, but I'm not completely sure. I was watching a documentary the other day in which say that the Archduke actually had the information that an assassination attempt was going on. And he kind of like publicized the fact of all of the places where he will be. And they were like many attempts on killing him. And he actually chose to continue with the plan. And he eventually died. But that was like a free choice for him. He could have said, oh yeah, I don't know, to his guards or whatever. I don't know what he had at the point. He could say like, can we stop this? Because I think that this is a danger for me. Let's go home. Maybe we can retry another time or whatever. And maybe the world wouldn't happen. But that's not the thing that he chose to do. He actually chose to continue with his plan and creating the results that they created after that. But it's as a consequence of an action of a person that freely chose that. Sorry.
Okay, so let me just summarize the connection you're making. But first, did you mean World War I? Okay.
Yeah,
I was going to say
probably.
Okay, yeah, because that's the war that was in part. I think there were some other economic reasons why World War I started, but I think the assassination attempt on Archduke Ferdinand was World War I, not World War II. But okay, so you're still okay. You're making a different argument now. And that's okay, because we're moving into this new domain of inquiry. But yeah, new argument for free will. So you're saying that because he was given new information, he acted, even if it was the same action he would have taken without that information. Like if he wasn't given the information about potential assassination attempts, he probably would have continued in the same way, doing his national tours, and so on and so forth. And even though he made the same choice, he still acted on that given knowledge. And that was his choice to make. He could have chose otherwise. That information could have basically gave him a greater degree of freedom. It said you can do X and now you can do Y. But you chose not to do Y. You still chose to do X. Okay. Johan?
Yeah, I was a bit confused to broaden the discussion, because I would prefer to keep it smaller, but it's no problem. I wonder if lack of information or wrong information doesn't mean I didn't make a choice, or somebody else made the choice for me. I just made the wrong choice, you could say. So when is a choice not really a choice, would you say? Because I had a limited knowledge. I have certain interest at that moment. My attention span at that moment all decides how valid or not valid my choice could be evaluated, but it was still my choice at that moment. And I could say tomorrow, oh, wait a minute, I shouldn't have done that. And I tried to make another choice. Decisions in my life, you have to get into a habit. So let's say I eat too much, I want to lose weight. Okay, then I have to reprogram myself to adapt, and that takes a few weeks, takes a few months, depends. But it's still the choice that maybe my doctor said, Johan, if you live like this for 10 years, you're gonna have this and this problem. I could ignore it, and I could try to change it. If I try to change it, my body will, let's say, is so strong, you could say I have very limited choice. Yeah, maybe, but it's still something I have to fight. And in the end, I can still make the choice to change myself. So it's a very limited choice. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but it's still, you have the opportunity to make the choice if you put effort in it. I hope it's clear.
Okay. So what you're broadening the idea that free will is not just a selection of choices apparent to you, that because otherwise you could make the argument, where do those choices come from? The idea being that the fact that you can reflect, amend, and change those choices, and you can then decide the next day that you've regretted one or the other, and then you can make a different choice from there forth. And you can alter your range of choices. I think what you're saying also is that you can only think today that you're going to pick up and put down the teacup, but tomorrow you can think, wait, I should have done that. I should have spilled that tea. So now you've added a new choice to that range of choices, is what you're saying. That shows agency. That shows that you don't only have the freedom to make the choice, you have the freedom for yourself to give yourself the whole range of choices. And I think I like that argument. I'm not siding with you because I'm trying to come from a different perspective. But I like that in the sense that what you're also fundamentally saying is that free will is not restricted to an individual action. That the definition of a human's capacity to act freely is based upon their whole life, not based upon their individual action. Because just because you thought to put down and up the cup in this moment doesn't mean you don't have the free will in general in your life to act differently. Which I find a similarity between that and Stoicism. Just as to throw this in here, that in Stoic philosophy, they don't consider a character based upon any one particular action. You may do something wrong by accident or make an unvirtuous choice at any one point in time. But over a long period of time, they're looking at your life holistically and saying, overall, not quantitatively, but overall, did you attempt to make progress and improve over time to become more virtuous? And if you did, that shows character, virtuous character. In the same way that you're telling us, you can make progress over time by expanding your own number of choices. Okay. I do have to. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
You clarified my own thoughts about my own words. Thank you.
It's okay. Yeah, no, that's what I like to do. It's just a way for us to kind of stay on the same page. It also helps me if I can say your words back to you in some clarity. That means I'm understanding it. Okay, so I would rebuttal, and I want to use Gonzalo's example of the Archduke Ferdinand's assassination attempts and his choice to continue going on tour around his country despite the assassination potential, or the attempts. And there were multiple attempts that failed, and then one succeeded. So despite the assassination attempts. I'm not so sure that choice was necessarily free. I mean, now let me turn this whole life perspective on you both. So, if we're considering the idea of free will as being progress in action, progress over life, that you can continually expand, or discreetly maybe, but somehow expand your degrees of freedom based upon new information and new experiences over life, like the Archduke Ferdinand did. As soon as he got new information, he expanded his degrees of freedom and still chose the same action, but he chose out of those two, and he added that one to his range of actions. That he was determined. I would argue he was determined, it sounds like, and I don't know his personality, but he might have been determined to act in that way. For example, this is how we have a field of psychology today, that while psychologies can be changed, that there are generally psychologies. There are generally people who fit into types and subtypes that psychologists only based upon general characteristics that they see over time to be similar. For example, the Archduke Ferdinand might just have been a stubborn person. He might, over the course of his life, didn't like to agree with his counsel, with his advisors, with the people who counseled him or advised him. That he always liked to stick to his position and disagreed with people underneath him because he thought he was in power and he had the right of mind, and right thought about what to choose to do or not to do. That somehow personality, although developing in your first years of life, ultimately become concretized, and they will ultimately dictate and determine your choices in the end. Even though you have a free range of choices and expand those, you will ultimately always choose a narrow subset of those choices, and if not only one of those choices, because of the personality traits you have in the beginning. That's my argument. I would argue that there's a strong influence of personality going on behind the scenes that has also developed over time, but has kind of solidified over time. Yeah, I just want to move to, I was hoping Alvaro would speak just so we can get a chance for each member of the group to go, and then the other members of the other group. Yo, Alvaro.
Yeah, I'm gonna get into some familiar territory for me, which I didn't want to, because I guess once you bring the subject of God to the table, most people feel that it may be becoming non-academic, but I don't think that's necessarily true. But I will bring to the table the idea or notion of a God or gods, that they or he knows us so well that he already knows the decision we will make. So, and that comes from Stoicism, right? In which the cosmos or the logos, I think it's all knowing. I may be mistaken and you may correct me. But if we come from that idea, if God has created someone with the character traits or with the tendency to act a certain way, as Steve just brought up. In that sense, even though the decision remains the very own decision of the individual or group of individuals, it is something that has been already determined to happen a certain way, because the person who planted that person or persons at that place or in that environment already knew how things were gonna unfold.
Okay, so I didn't know if you were done, so I paused. So you're tracing this back to the possibility of a generally deterministic universe, cosmos, or a providential God or a providential nature, like logos in Stoicism. And what you're saying is that there's a distinction, though our knowledge of what's possible and our possible range of actions and our possible choices to make are open. That, and you don't necessarily have to agree with me that personality fixes your range of choices. So you're coming from a different perspective. What you're saying is that even if you had a complete apparent freedom to I think that somebody's mic. Okay, sorry. Even though you have an apparent freedom to choose whichever of the choices that come to you, the fact of the matter is that there is a potential that logos or some providential universe or God still is dictating teleologically, maybe not, but still dictates. Because it's deterministic, because it's already determined the end to every action, that there is an objective end to what you're doing, regardless of how you act. You don't know. So in absence of knowledge, you may have free will, but there's always an unknowable force determining what you're going to do. Is that what you're saying?
Okay, let me rephrase it a little bit. Maybe give you an example. I want to give you an example that is not from the Bible. Are you okay with me bringing up an example from the Bible, or should I? Okay, so let me see. So in the Old Testament, there is the story of twin brothers, Esau and Jacob. And it is mentioned that God preferred Jacob over Esau. And even though Esau was the firstborn, Jacob ended up taking on the rights of being the firstborn in the family. So when you speak about the history of the people of Israel, you don't say that the God of the Old Testament is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. You actually refer to God as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Let's assume that that firstborn right had been kept with Esau. So the family split. There was a whole generation of people that came out of Esau and a whole generation of people that came out of Jacob. And of course, as the head of each one of these people, they behave differently, and the story of the people of God is split in two different ways, right? So I'm claiming that when God chose Jacob, and knowing his character, knowing how he would choose, he was already determining what the story for his people was gonna be. So just to frame it in, or just to put it in a more in a less biblical context now. So I'm trying to come up with a different example. So let's assume that, I mean, I don't want to use this example because it's also horrific, but let's use it. So the idea of an evil person like Hitler, right, and the Holocaust. The idea that this one individual was able to trigger so many things that we didn't run, but they happened because he was an important character playing an important role in those events. Had he never been Chancellor of Germany, for example, had somebody else been in power, those things would have not happened. Or it's that we can claim that they may have not happened. So whether God or the supernatural or whatever it may be that allowed Hitler to take on that role, it may be Hitler choosing to promote or to take action in a certain way, but the supernatural, knowing that that individual will behave that way, allowed it. So even though Hitler chose to act a certain way, there is a higher power that it knew that person was going to act that way and allow it.
So what you're saying is that, okay, so I don't necessarily want to restrict us to the idea that there's necessarily a God, but I think your idea can still apply to this discussion with or without a God, or with or without a supernatural power. And what you said just before actually struck me as, oh, that's what you're saying. So what you're saying is that, for example, the fact that Hitler was chancellor and the fact that the Holocaust happened is a matter of fact now. But if another person was chancellor, let's say another person on the as a member of the I don't know any other party back then. Maybe there was a I don't know the political parties at the time other than the National.
But examples about I was using Hitler because it's
but that's a good example. I want to run with it. So let me just clarify. So let's say there was a Republican Party back then, maybe a grandfather Republican Party back from the Weimar Republic. So there was some Republican Party, which, if you analyze them enough, would not have committed the same atrocities as Hitler if they rose to chancellorship during that time. They wouldn't have started World War II, and the whole ball wouldn't have been rolling like that. Because you could necessarily predict what would have happened if that party rose to power instead of Hitler. The fact that you could do that indicates that reality is determined. The fact that if historians, let's say, could go back in history and analyze alternate histories and say, if this is what actually happened, then none of these things probably wouldn't have happened. And to a high degree of probability, they could determine that, then they're determining on a historical scale what would happen in alternate realities. And I'm not sure if that's direct evidence that what happened in this reality is determined, but that indicates that perhaps if you substitute the roles, if we lived in the alternate reality when the Holocaust and World War II didn't happen, then maybe there's a historian in that reality saying, what if Hitler rose to power? What if he did? What would have happened? And then kind of did the same thing historians are doing today and said, if Hitler rose to power, there would have been mass atrocities or genocides and the World War started. So I think what you're saying is that on a historical scale, you could create, or even on a local scale, you could always ask yourself, what if I did differently? Then that would have happened. And because you could have determined that from like in physics, you're given initial conditions and you can necessarily determine what the conditions are at point time equals 5 seconds. You can do the same thing in history. There is no free will, that things are determined because you could predict based on your analysis of the initial conditions what's going to happen. Okay, that makes more sense.
So, sorry.
No, you can begin.
So that means no. I'm trying to understand the idea to put it in the meeting minutes. What
So
Alvaro is saying is that because something else started the consequences, kind of like a snowball. That means that this was already determined, correct? Did I understand correctly?
Yes, sort of. Have you ever seen that show, Quantum Leap? No?
No.
Well, basically, so I think Steve did a very good job explaining it. But basically, if you know somebody's going to behave a certain way for sure, right? Even though if you have an animal, let's not even refer to person. If you have a dog as your pet guardian at home, and you know that if an intruder comes, he's going to bite that intruder. He's going to attack. And that's going to prevent people from coming into your home. You know that by sheer nature of that animal, that he's going to tend to attack an intruder and it's going to keep them away. You're already determining to some extent what is going to happen, right? Either no intruder will come in because it will fear the animal, and if the intruder comes, he's going to get beaten, right? You know that if you don't choose a dog, but if you choose maybe a cat, the cat is not going to bite the intruder and the intruder is not going to go away. So what do? You buy a Rottweiler or a Doberman, and that's the animal you put at home, right? So if you take that now with humans, if you think that it is God or gods or providence, if you don't want to use the term God, if there is a providence that is saying, okay, if John F. Kennedy becomes president of the United States, he's going to create NASA because he's somebody who has that type of character that is going to allocate funds towards projects like that. If rather Lyndon B. Johnson or Nixon become president, they won't invest in things like that. So we'll plant JFK as president of the United States, and he'll begin that project. So in that sense, even though the choice is of JFK to start NASA, by Providence allowing him to become president, there has already been a decision made, a conclusion, or a determination that NASA will be created.
I think Gonzalo, the snapshot of snowballing, by the way, if you want to write that in the protocol, that's like a good maybe keyword to use for what he's describing.
Already did. Yes, but I like this because this is my sort of overthinking that I do all of the time, and I feel like I'm in my zone and I will answer in my zone. But regardless of that, there's always something that we have as humans. One of the examples that you gave was kind of like the Second World War started as a snowballing effect of World War I, for example. Kind of like people in Germany were dying of hunger, and all of the results that that Germany had to pay as a debt from World War I created this sort of situation in which there was no other option available for the people to start killing each other, right? That's kind of like some sort of thing that you're trying to create. But at the same time, what I'm proposing is that people really wanted to kill each other because there were many other options available at the time that they didn't choose, even though they had done. In the same way that after the war started and people were taking more knowledge about how this thing will unfold, they started escapating. Vamos, todavía. They started escaping the country and leaving and trying to search other places where this situation was not occurring. That's kind of like the perspective that I'm seeing on it. There is some sort of a snowballing effect, but the world doesn't really work that way. In the sense that you can always leave. You always have a choice available for you, and it's not kind of like this will be very bad, but if you're suffering as a person being tortured by the Nazis, you can always join the Nazis. That's a choice available for you. You didn't choose it, but it was there. And that's a point for the fact that you could do it. You have that option available for you. You didn't do it because you were stubborn or whatever. But that's kind of like that's kind of like my point. The option was there. So rationally, if you can view the option from a rational perspective, that it's like, okay, I have expanded my mind. So this unknown part that I think that Steve was talking about, I added a little bit more space to it. That means that I created my own choices that they weren't available for me before. But I do it by observation and thinking and rationality. Kind of like that's creepy subject, by the way, but I like it.
So I wanted to give, but before I give Johan the floor, because I'll give each member of each side a chance to speak. I wanted to summarize, because I think this is a really good discussion. This reminds me of the kind of the incompatibility, it seems, between the theory of general relativity and quantum mechanics. The fact that we can't find a theory of quantum gravity, not yet anyway, that could satisfy all known physical laws because, well, for example, there's no mathematical way to determine what's at the center of a black hole. That's a point of contention, the small and the large. And it seems like this is kind of the debate that we're having, where Alvaro and I are basically arguing that humans are determined on a large scale. For example, there's no denying that if you look over the course of history at every war and natural disaster, even today, you can look at the incident in Syria, for example, or the incident or what's happening in Belarus, for example. There's clear indications that whenever there is a natural disaster or there is a conflict, there is going to be a mass of migrants moving from one place to another. Everybody said this as the Syrian war started, and it happened. So I think the perspective we're taking is that it's determined on that massive scale, whereas your free will side is coming from the complete other direction. You're saying that, yes, there will be a large number of people who are determined to migrate from one country to another because of that conflict, but you can never determine which of the people will do that. For example, if you pick out somebody at random, you cannot predict if that individual themselves will be one of the mass of people migrating from one country to another. And I frame it in the sense of a contention between quantum mechanics and gravity, because it doesn't seem like there's a solution. It doesn't seem like it literally doesn't make sense. Like, why is it seems like on the individual scale we have free will, but on the mass scale of human society, it seems like everything's determined. And you're right, this doesn't make any sense. But that's kind of the perspectives we're coming from, and I think it's an age-old question that hasn't been answered yet. But I just wanted to point out that
to disprove my own point, kind of like, because it's because of the way that the universe exploded, we are probably on a trajectory to collide with something, and that's determined. And I know that on the massive scale, our planet will collide with something else. And that trajectory has been there since forever. And it's already there. But is that scale useful for me? Can I change that somehow? Can I influence that somehow? No. It's already there. And that's like a really huge, massive scale, right? It's something that we cannot do anything about it.
I think you're also necessarily restricting for yourself. You're restricting the idea of free will to like the sphere of control, like for Stoics. Yeah, if things not in your control, you have to relinquish your freedom to decide its consequences. But for things you can control, you can definitely determine their consequences. Johan.
Is my mic on? Yeah. I'm confused in the sense that what I hear from your discussion is situations we do not have a choice. If a river flows over and there's 3 meters of water approaching me, I don't have a choice to say to the water, okay, I don't want you. You understand what I mean? If a stormtrooper points a gun at me, of course I can maybe, I want to survive. Of course, I would have the choice to refuse whatever he says, and he will kill me. But still, my choice. It's not my choice to kill myself, or that he will kill me. So I'm getting a little bit confused where you guys think where the free choice should be. I mean, sometimes there is no free choice because of circumstances. If Hitler would be, there were some assassinations against him also. Would be killed, I'm sure, because there's no such thing that we are not godlike, like in the beginning of the discussion. If Hitler would be killed, the history will be different, and we don't know. We have no idea. I think ultimate reality is you can make a, what's a good English word for it? We don't know. That's my answer. We have no idea what would have happened. And also think about, let's say the Second World War. England basically started the World War. Hitler was just, in his working for Germany. England, and justified, I think, started the World War. So I think it makes it very complicated. At least that's my take of the situation after the discussion. There's a lot of, I still believe there is free will, but it's very limited, and you have to seize it.
No, thank you for your take, and thank you for also. It's a good summary of the kind of the problems we're dealing with this discussion, because I think, and maybe because it's only 10 minutes to 8, that for the next 20 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe we start wrapping up, and we can start from here to have an organic discussion, unless Alvaro wants to make another point. That's so his hand raised. But I think we're coming to that kind of point where we're having problems distinguishing what are we defining as free will exactly, and because I can't argue against free will if I don't know your definition of free will. And I think because we all agree that there's a problem of, well, if there's a rule determining how humans on a massive scale operate, why isn't there a rule on how an individual operates on a local scale? Why is there this disconnect? And I think that is also a problem that's unsolvable without data and without further analysis over a range of disciplines we don't know of yet. And yeah, we're coming to a point where the problem kind of becomes intractable, but also becomes solvable if we kind of narrow a definition somehow. Alvaro, you raised your hand before.
Yeah, I was going to mention that I like the idea of thinking in terms of providence instead of determinism. And of course, wrapping up and going more into middle ground, right? Not dismissing completely the idea of free will now. At least what I want to bring up, supporting my side, is that at least I also don't think we can rule out the existence of providence. And if you want to use determinism as a synonym, so be it. But again, I like to think more in terms of providence. We oftentimes in everyday language use the term luck. Oh, I was lucky, or he was lucky, or that was sheer luck, or that was a coincidence, right? For somebody to, regardless of, I am with Johan, we don't know what would have had happened if Hitler had not become chancellor. I can only speculate. But for somebody like Hitler or anybody at those levels of power, it not only takes planning, it also takes luck. And if you equate luck to providence, then you can make a claim that there is some sort of determinism also going on. And again, I think it's easier to discuss or to make a case for this when we're speaking about very important people or very important events, and say, oh, you know, this guy not only planned it, but he had also luck on his side as to become chancellor or to become president or to become, you know, fill in the blank. But also you can use that term luck or providence for things such as, you know, that happen every day. And in that sense, I think that is the case for determinism, that happen every day for everyday people like me.
No, thank you. Yeah, I think you make a good point, not necessarily against free will, but you're making a good case that there is a level of determinism that's largely ignored in our everyday lives, even on an individual scale. For example, when a person is born and raised, and this you can track by individual, when a person is born and raised, their future, we know from data, largely spawns from their neighborhood they live in, perhaps the level of economic stability that they have by their parents and by their family, the level of education they receive. Like it's interesting the level of variables we don't recognize really help determine our lives for the foreseeable future. You make a good point in saying that, and you also make a good point to wrap around to Johan's point. Like it is kind of an arrogant, very arrogant thing to say that we can definitely predict everything that would happen in alternate history if this or this happened, because we really can't. I think I also agree that if we're wrapping up now, for just summarizing, I would agree, if I step out of my role as devil's advocate, that humans are largely terrible at predicting what would happen in human history, in society in the future. Like if you were to predict in the next 10 years whether or not this or that country really follows what they promised to do in the Paris Climate Agreement, I have no idea. In fact, it's been a surprise the last few years who are what doesn't follow that protocol. So I think it's also kind of, it's largely unpredictable. It's kind of arrogant of us to say we can predict this or that, when in fact the only reason we can look back at history and say that made sense is because we can look back at it, not because we can't look. We have to look forward at it. I just before Gonzalo goes, so every day I get a Stoic quote, and from an app I have. And this quote is perfect for this discussion because it really captures the Stoic idea of freedom. And this is by Seneca. Can you no longer see a road to freedom? It's right in front of you. You need only turn over your wrists. It's kind of Seneca's and Stoicism's twisted way of saying, why is there this debate about free will and determinism? You can't be free unless you turn over your wrists, unless you turn over your choice of action to what fate is bringing you in the first place. which is kind of a weird compatibilism I've never thought of before. I mean, I've heard this argument. It's like the famous story by the Stoics of the cart and the dog. And the dog can choose to fight against the cart pulling it, although it's tied with the rope by the cart. And the dog can fight against the cart's motion and be dragged along, or it could happily follow the cart. And that's the Stoics' idea of freedom, that the dog has this degree of freedom to walk this way or that way, but it still has to follow the cart. It's a weird compatibilism between free will and determinism. And I thought not an argument for it, but it would just throw it in here. That's the Stoics' idea of how to solve this problem. Gonzalo and then Johan.
No, Johan, please.
Oh, okay.
Oh, thank you. Even if somebody would convince me I have no free will, I will act like I have free will. Because otherwise, I don't know, life seems a bit pointless. That's basically what I think about it. But I do admit it's very limited.
You make a good point. I mean, it's like in practice, we never actually just act on day to day. Oh, I'm determined to do this or that, because then I think we're actually just restricting our freedom further. Ironically enough, the more we, not ironically, but it actually fits the whole system, where the less you consider yourself determined, the more freely you tend to act, the more likely you are to choose different options. Whereas the more likely you are to think I'm determined in this way or that, the more likely you are to continue bad habits. Or like, for example, if an alcoholic never thought he had the what do they call it? The growth mindset. If he never thought he had the growth mindset to change, he would never change. And it's the same idea. Yeah, it's a good point that in practice we never act like we're determined. Gonzalo.
Yeah, that's the thing that I wanted to mention, that I didn't like some parts of the discussion related to we were borderline back into the born versus nurture sort of argument, and to be honest, I don't really like it. I like to stay in the side of the world where people can change and their future is not determined by all of these, let's say, situational things. I know that for most of the people that's the reality, but I really like to focus on the 1 out of 100 that kind of like perseveres and triumphs in their idea of changing. Yeah.
Yeah, I also agree. We got caught up. We almost got cornered into this nature versus nurture argument, which is more of a deterministic argument in general, that you were either determined by nature or by nurture. But we ignore. Yeah, so it's a good point that I think we also underestimate how much determinism is restricted. So I think, in summary, we've also talked a lot about how free will may exist, but is highly restricted to different extents depending on the domain you're talking about, or the circumstances and the contexts. That we also underestimate how restricted determinism is, because in practice it doesn't make sense, and when we talk about it, it doesn't make sense. And because of this debate between nature and nurture, well, if there was a debate at all between that, determinism would have been well defined. It's based purely on your genetics. It's based purely on the environment you're in. But the fact that there's a debate between nature and nurture, and it's murky, it's not really clear how determinism works. So to a large extent, because we know that there's some degree of variability between how much nature and nurture affects you, we can act freely to change that. it gives us kind of a window of internal opportunity that if nature and nurture is determining us, but it's still vague which one is which, we ourselves as internal beings, as with our growth mindsets, could combat against both to change ourselves, neither from nature and from nurture. Johan.
Yes, guys, I have to wrap up because I have to pick up my sister. She's coming by train and it's dark outside. Thank you so much. I liked the discussion. Alvaro, if I say it right, Gonzalo and Steve. I enjoyed the short discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming back. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really like this discussion too. Do you guys have any recommendations about texts or philosophers regarding the subject of free will and determinism? I have one to recommend, but I think it would be nice to kind of, as we're ending, to kind of suggest or recommend to everybody, not necessarily talking to anybody watching us, but like you guys, all of us. Do we want to recommend to ourselves any further reading? Not by any due date, but just over the long course of time, things that we could read to kind of get a different perspective on the subject. And I don't know if you guys have any ideas of any philosopher or literary person, anybody you've read that might have a specific perspective on this, Alvaro.
Yeah, I'm actually, this is a confession to make, but I'm actually, with my reading list, I am stepping a little bit away from Stoicism, and I am reading on power, more specifically the books by Robert Greene. And he has one that is on seduction or persuasion. And that's what I was coming into this meeting already with that idea in mind of, hey, if you're persuaded or seduced, to what extent are you using your free will, right? Because if you're persuaded or seduced, at the end you're choosing, but that choice is being influenced, framed by a person. In this case, it has to do with a person. And then for this discussion, I was elaborating and trying to bring up the concept of providence and God, because from a philosophical perspective, I think it's more fitting. But I think it's actually better just to think about individual relationships, right? If you have a spouse, for example, and your spouse is persuading you to behave a certain way, to what extent that is your choice, to what extent is his or her choice, right? So I will recommend the book by Robert Greene, The Art of Seduction, which is something that I am planning to pick up on really soon.
Yeah, but that's one of the reasons why I choose to frame my debate around the rationality aspect, because also if you notice something about the Stoic teachings, they say that the more practice you get towards following the truth and your rationality, you get this intuition about what it's true and what it's a manipulation and what it's an illusion and what it's a nature desire or kind of like or an ego desire. Kind of like you start interacting with yourself from another perspective, which creates and allows this knowledge to arise for you. And that's the thing where you start to say like, okay, I didn't know that I was manipulated with these techniques, or I didn't know that I had this sort of bias towards something. When that sort of veil is lifted, you start seeing the other veils that you may have. And because you're rationally thinking about, oh, wait, I need to think that I'm always biased towards choosing the thing that, I don't know, it's numerically small, regardless of its the thing that it's best for my interest or not. and then you start considering these things, which means that you're ultimately having an option to get away from that. That's kind of like the only thing that
Yeah, I don't agree, but I agree that I think that's why the Stoics focus on the rationality. Gute Nacht. That's why the Stoics, not to you guys, there's somebody else here. There was that the reason why the Stoics focus so much on rationality, like you said, like it's because they understand that the mind is truly the only thing that's really in your control. I mean, even today with their neuroscientific discoveries, that how much our habits and unconscious ingrain certain habits and protocols into our minds, to kind of unload, and so to free up space for our rational decision making. Regardless of that, our mind somewhere in there is really the only only citadel to which we can retrieve and really make up our own minds about things. That I think that's why they chose to focus on that, because regardless of what happens in politics, I mean, I do agree that what happens in political decisions matters a lot, because the ramifications of any political decision is a matter of human ethics and dignity. But I do agree that that's why the Stoics resorted to the human mind being the center of free will and rationality, because that was really the only thing under our control. Before you go, Alvaro, there's a philosopher. So Robert Greene, I got to read. I think I've heard of him before. He's supposed to be like one of the best 20th century English writers. But there's a philosopher I've always wanted to read, and one of his books, he writes a huge section on freedom, and it's kind of a radical freedom idea. And I've heard it thrown around, and I've heard vague ideas about it, but I want to read the book because I need to know the details. Like the general ideas don't make any sense until you kind of get deeper into it. And you guys have probably heard of him, Jean-Paul Sartre. Yeah, he's one of the most famous French philosophers of the 20th century. He has a predecessor, but I kind of want to start with Sartre because his idea of freedom is more recognized, more understood. And he studied phenomenology. He kind of was in that camp of philosophy, but he specifically had, and I forget which part of the book it was. It was I think on being and nothingness was his magnum opus. Being and nothingness. Let me just confirm. That was the book to which I refer by Jean-Paul Sartre, and because I forget which one was by Heidegger and by him. Yeah, it's Being and Nothingness by Jean-Paul Sartre, and there's a section of it, I believe, that has an entire treatise on free will, that I've been meaning to read. So just as a point of recommendation, Alvaro.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up this third book, which I know it's widely read, and the author is a Nobel Prize winning economist. Think Fast and Slow, and regardless what Gonzalo was mentioning about rationality, I think I have discussed this book with Gonzalo before, because I think this book brings up the term heuristics, and I know Gonzalo has brought up that term before. And it's just to point out that, for example, there are many things that, because our brain is actually so hard-coded in working in certain ways, we will default, maybe rationally, maybe not, I don't know, to conduct ourselves in certain manners. And that's something that companies such as Amazon today, when they present to us items, for example, on the website, and we cannot stop buying things from these websites, they're using these heuristics in order to sell us items, right? So I wanted to bring that up. I also wanted to propose that for the subject of utilitarianism, maybe we consider Adam Smith, since we have heard that he was a Stoic himself, or he was into Stoicism. And I think even though I don't know if it is considered a pure utilitarian. His works are considered pure utilitarian. I don't think there is anybody more worth highlighting as a founding father of utilitarianism as Adam Smith. So maybe you guys would like to consider that for an upcoming meeting on utilitarianism.
Yeah, it's he also wrote a book on ethics that I've been meaning to read too. Like something about like the theory of moral sentiments or something like that, or the theory and ethics of moral sentiments. So, and I didn't know that. I only knew Adam Smith for his economic theory in his God, I forget the name of the book, the title of the book, of Nations of something, but yeah, thank you. So I've only known him for that, but I've never known him for ethics, and I've been meaning to delve deep into that. So I need to read a little bit more. So yeah, I think I know I'm planning this meeting until 8:30, but I'm also gonna head out. So because I've been at the school way too long today. Gonzalo, could you send the protocol to in the Telegram group? Can you just share it with everybody?
Yeah, I will create a note over there to. I think that I can post it inside the Telegram directly, so I don't use any third-party tool or anything else that anybody has access.
Okay, cool.
But yep, I will upload there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for keeping the protocol, and thanks you guys for coming by. This is a really good discussion. I'll see you.
Really good.
I'll see you in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks is our next book of the month. So if you're reading that, continue reading it. That is a deeper one. That is a very deep academic book. But if you want to read like the first couple of chapters or so, and that the first 2 chapters are short. Read like the first 3 or 4 chapters, and it's already a good start. I'll see you in 2 weeks. See you guys. Have a good night.
Bye. You too. Have a good night. Safe trip.